will be available for repeated viewing. Press and members of the public are also permitted to film and broadcast this meeting, and those remaining are consenting to being filmed and recorded and to the possible use of those images and recordings for broadcasting purposes. There are no scheduled fire alarms today. In the event of an alarm, out of that door, turn left, follow someone in uniform and wait in the car park. You know how the microphones work. Turn them off if you're not using it because it saps the strength. Okay, item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. Good morning, Nicola.
Good morning. We've got apologies from Councillor Goodfellow.
Yes, we knew about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Anyone else? Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Any? No. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting on the 18th of December. Any comments on that? Speak now or forever. Item 4, deputations. None. Okay. Item 5, Chairman's announcements. The government announced the Provisional Local Government Finance Settlement in the middle of December, which provides us with information on our funding allocation and council tax powers over the next 3 years. We have responded to this consultation on the proposed changes, and we've actually had yesterday, I think, the final settlement. Rob, do you want to say anything now or on your bit?
I'll pick that up when I cover my report. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. The Chief Fire Officer and I also wrote to local MPs to explain the impact of the proposed settlement and to ask for their support, particularly with respect to the prospects of a 2.9 million reduction in our funding allocation for 28-29. Any comment, Chief?
Just that it was disappointing for us to see another reduction in our grant funding from government. It is challenging for fire and rescue at the moment. Our demand is increasing, but the means for which we have available to meet those demands are reducing. I mean, just outdoor fires themselves doubled in the first 6 months of 25-26 compared to the same period the previous year because of the hot summer that we had, with extreme weather events increasing and the need for us to respond to emerging risks. It is becoming increasingly difficult when government funding is consistently reducing. So we will continue to raise awareness of the impact of these cuts. The team have worked incredibly hard to bring in front of you a balanced budget today, and we'll continue to work in the coming months to look at what the budget is going to look like for us in subsequent years as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And the Chief Financial Officer will talk more about this when we come to item 8. Now, we have a thank you to our Vice Chairman, Councillor Roger Price, who has been a councillor for 33 years and has been on the Fire Authority for 25 years, which is a staggering amount of time, and has contributed a huge amount of value and information to the process, particularly with his contacts in the LGA, which are vital to our very survival. During this time, he served 10 years as a member of the Firefighters Pension Board and has been a strong advocate for the Fire Authority, the service and our communities in so many ways. While he will remain on the Fire Authority until May the 7th, when there are elections, this will be his last full authority meeting, and we wish formally to recognise and sincerely thank him for the significant contributions he's made and the dedications that he has shown throughout. So please, a round of applause for our Vice Chairman, Roger. And we have earlier given him some gifts and some tokens of our appreciation. So, Roger, thank you.
Thank you.
Item 6, then, members' developments. Let me start this off. On Friday, Roger and I went to the East Cowes on the Isle of Wight for a groundbreaking ceremony for the new East Cowes fire station, which was a great success. It didn't rain, surprisingly. And much fun was had by all. The Mayor of East Cowes was there, and there was, I think, a councillor from the Isle of Wight Council. And I did pay particular attention to the fire crew who normally occupy that station, because they've had a difficult time working out of Newport which is only a few minutes as the crow flies, but as driving in traffic with the chain bridge not working and everything, takes them hours to get to Newport, and they lost out on several shouts because they just couldn't get there on time. So they are thrilled that by Christmas they will have their home back, and that was exciting. I compliment our fire crews for the extraordinarily good work they did at the fire at Southampton Hospital, which completely gutted the endoscopy unit, which is excellent. I know because I was in it 5 days before. So I got out just in time. So they're going well. Members, any development items yet? Stephen?
Thank you, Chairman. With a number of colleagues, on the 18th of December, after the last authority meeting, I went to Basingstoke to the Fire Cadets pass-out parade, which was fascinating and interesting and inspiring to see these young people exercising some of the skills that they would be looking to do if they eventually join the adult service. Lots of very proud parents watching on, and a very inspiring evening.
Okay, thank you. Lou?
Well, I'm sure all of us will recall what an excellent event we all attended after the last authority meeting with the pass out of all the new full-time firefighters, not our cadets. And that was brilliant. And also on the 15th of January, I went round the Incident Command Unit, which was, if you haven't been, please go. In fact, it'd be really good if we could kind of organise, I don't know, like a mini event for us as members where we could all perhaps go to different elements within the fire service to understand more about their role, because Sean Gray was incredibly passionate and so knowledgeable. And I think everybody would benefit from understanding all these different component parts, because, you know, the service is only as good as all the parts that make it up. You know, whether somebody is in the back room answering the phone calls or whether they are on the front line, every role is important. So, yeah, that was incredibly good, and I really thank him for his time. And please, yes, perhaps we could all go together somewhere.
Okay, thank you. Roger?
From my point of view, one is on going to the Isle of Wight last Friday. It was quite interesting the site, how small it was. When we actually approved the plan, I mean, you see the plans, like we've got one here today to do with Droxford. You see the plans, but you don't see the site in its reality. And when you actually go onto site, it was quite surprising to me how small the site was and what we're going to fit on there, how we're going to get it on there, but obviously we can. And again, the slopes of it, at the back and at the front, at the side, it's quite surprising. That was the part on that one. I've also had a meeting with the retired firefighters concerning pensions, and this is an ongoing thing with Catherine Edgecombe, because trying to find people who have retired and have not kept the service informed of where they're now living, is trying to find them so as they can get their benefits that they are entitled to under the Matthews system with pensions. And it's very difficult because there are a number of people which are still not contactable. And I'm going to the NJC on Thursday. It's the National Joint Council meeting on conditions of service and pay for firefighters, which will be an interesting one because of the changes which are wanting to do, and the services are giving me a briefing of what we would like to see change in the way of the conditions of service for firefighters at the moment to get it changed. So that's what I've been doing.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you. Zoe.
Thank you, Chairman. I met with Matt, who's now leading on devolution and LGR. I also had a meeting with Molly, leading on people, where we had a general conversation about HR activity, caseloads, types and management of those caseloads. And we also discussed the outturn of the pulse survey that's just been conducted with staff. There are some outcomes that need development plans within that pulse survey, and further analysis, so a deep dive into actually the output of them and some of the data that's needed. And that's the percentage that feel that they've been discriminated against and bullied, and then the percentage that maybe were dissatisfied of the process that followed that. We also discussed programmes such as TRIM, which is the Trauma Risk Incident Management programme. We discussed about exposure to trauma, how TRIM is triggered, the uptake of it, and how it might be improved in the near future to support those serving. We also talked about other interventions such as mental health check-ins, wellbeing referrals, and the relaunch of the mental health first aiders.
Okay, thank you. David Drew.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I too attended the event in Basingstoke for the young firefighters, which was a very enjoyable event to watch how the proud parents. Also here at Eastleigh, the graduation ceremony, and I wanted to pick up on a specific part of that I thought worked really well, which was at the end they were presented with their, well, they weren't wings or dolphins, but whatever they had pinned to them. They were all handed one, and there weren't enough pinners on compared to graduates. So I was close enough to stand up and pin one on, and I encouraged our Royal Navy visitor to do the same. But it might be something next time that if we do that there are enough people who can pin them on, the graduates, because I think they really enjoyed receiving it and having and going through that part of the process. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, good point. I too went to that passing out parade, which is always hugely encouraging, particularly the bubbling pride that the parents, friends, relationships always have in just watching their new firefighters. I mean, it really is most exciting. Well, one thing we used to do, I don't know if we can reinstate it, was that when the firefighters came up, the audience was told what they did beforehand, which I found really interesting. Did we stop that for any particular reason, or did it just lapse? Can we reinstate it? Because it's absolutely fascinating to know where they come from, and to decide to be a firefighter. I think it's great. Okay, any more members' developments? Yeah.
Just one thing, I just want to thank Rob and his team who came to meet my flood group and talk about what they can and can't do, which is really important to get the message out there and make sure people are calling 999, which doesn't happen very often actually when they've been a flood. Thank you.
Okay, George?
Yeah, you might be aware, but Portsmouth Fire Service have reported a number of issues recently where fire trucks have been unable to turn corners in the road, and we've had issues, but we've been liaising with the Traffic and Transport Department. I'm pleased to say that they've been really proactive with that, and recently we've added a few more double yellow lines which have extended just slightly past the corners of the road to allow the fire engines to get through. Equally, we're sending out additional officers to clamp down on problem areas that have been reported by the local fire service. We've got another report going forward to the Traffic and Transport Department before the end of this term. To hopefully get a few more provisions in place, because we have had a number of hot spots in Portsmouth where fire trucks have basically just become stuck and not been able to get around corners and attend fires. So just to let the committee know that is being resolved from our angle.
Okay, thank you. Any more members? Nope. All right, thank you. Let's move to item 7 then. Members' Allowance Scheme proposals for the 1st of April 26 onwards, which is on page 11 of your paperwork. And I would ask Paul to introduce this paper, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, members. This is very much an administrative item, and as you will probably all be aware, regulations require the authority to make a members' allowances scheme before the beginning of each financial year for the year ahead. The regulations also allow for a scheme to include an annual adjustment by reference to an index for up to 4 years. So effectively, it's possible to set a scheme for up to a maximum of 4 years, with the allowances increasing each year by reference to an index. The current scheme on that basis was approved in 2022 and runs for 4 years to the end of March 2026, and the allowances in it were indexed by reference to the pay award for staff at grade P and above. So as the current scheme effectively expires at the end of this coming March, the authority needs to set a new scheme for the next financial year onwards, and when it does that, it has to have regard to any relevant recommendations made by the independent remuneration panels of the constituent authorities. So we don't have our own independent remuneration panel, but you take into account any recommendations made by the constituent authority IRPs. So in light of all that, in 2025, last year, the Audit and Governance Committee established a member working group to consider the current scheme and proposals for a new scheme. And the working group considered the recommendations that have been published by the constituent authority IRPs, and also considered the devolution proposals in Hampshire, which will see the Fire and Rescue Authority transfer to the Mayoral County Combined Authority, currently in April 2027. So in light of all that, the working group recommended that a new scheme in the same form as the current scheme, with the same allowances indexed in the same way, be adopted for the remaining life of the authority, however long that turns out to be. So that was recommended by the working group to Audit and Governance Committee, who agreed that they would make that recommendation at the meeting in December to you as the full authority to determine. And just one little additional point to note, there were links to the relevant published IRP recommendations from the constituent authorities. There is also a more recent one from Hampshire County Council's IRP, where they were asked to consider a similar proposal for the County Council to effectively create a new scheme in the form of the old one in light of devolution in LGR, and they recommended that was the approach the County Council should take. So that obviously supports and is consistent with the proposals in the paper. So hopefully that helps, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Paul. Members? David.
Can I just acknowledge and thank the members of the working group? I think they've made a very pragmatic and sensible decision, and it's always good to hear that we're consistent with Hampshire County Council.
Thank you. Noted. David?
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and to acknowledge Councillor Harrison's leadership on that panel committee. I think it makes perfect sense to, in effect, roll forward what we were doing without making any significant changes. The big significant changes are coming elsewhere. It's absolutely right that we frankly didn't do anything substantial, and that was unanimous, and I hope it would be here as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more? No. All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. Moving on to... no, we need a recommendation, which is on page 11. That, having considered the recommendations of the Audit and Governance Committee and the recommendations of the constituent authorities' independent remuneration panels, the proposed new members' allowance scheme for 26-27 and, if appropriate, 27-28, 28-29 and 29-30, attached at Appendix B, be approved and adopted by the full authority with effect from the 1st of April 2026. Agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Now, moving on then to item 8, which is the budget precept requirement for 26-27, including the medium-term financial plan, page 29 of your paperwork. This report includes various recommendations for approval, including recommendation 13G, which relates to an exempt Appendix C2 in the capital programme summary. It is proposed that recommendation 13G be deferred until the exempt session on the agenda item 17, following the Droxford report at agenda 16, which provides some necessary context. Happy with that? Okay. So let me invite Rob Safras to introduce this report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. So this is the budget setting report for 26-27. It also provides an update on the current financial year and a look ahead at the medium-term financial plan over the next 3 years, which coincides with the period covered by the local government finance settlement. It also provides an update on the capital programme and 3 strategy documents that are presented for the authority to review and approve today as well. So the reserve strategy, the treasury management strategy and the capital and investment strategy. I'd also highlight that it includes, as well as one of the appendices, my Section 25 report, which is to set out my view on the robustness of the estimates within the budget and the adequacy of reserves. So if I start first of all just with a look at the current financial year. So we started with the position, as we've talked about at previous meetings, where we had a budget gap to close for 25-26, and the authority approved the delivery of in-year savings of about £1.7 million and a draw from the budget equalisation reserve of about £1.8 million. So at Q1 and Q2, we were forecasting that we wouldn't need to take that full draw from the BER, the Budget Equalisation Reserve, but a draw would still be required. The number has moved slightly, but is broadly the same for Q3. So we now think instead of the £1.8 million draw that was required, only about 500,000 will be needed. So that's slightly less than forecast at Q1 and Q2. And the main driver of that difference continues to be the vacancies against the support staff budgets, which are linked to the organisational design work that the service has been carrying out this year as one of the ways of delivering the in-year and forward-looking savings that were being targeted. There's more detail in the report, and obviously happy to take any questions on the current year when we come to questions later. But if I move on to the forward budget. So we covered at the previous meeting in December some of the background context for the financial challenges and the position that the authority is in with a forecast budget gap. So there were a number of external drivers, so the period of austerity followed by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the period of high inflation, which has all had an impact on the authority directly and the public finances more generally. We received the provisional settlement on the 17th of December. So very helpfully, that is a 3-year settlement that provides us with much more certainty from a financial planning point of view. It implemented a new local government funding formula following the Fair Funding Review consultation. For the fire and rescue sector, the changes to the formula are just to update really the inputs that go into the existing formula. So the government has recognised that there needs to be a further review of the way that the mechanics of the formula actually work, which they are looking to do with input from the sector ahead of the next spending review. But for the time being, we've got the current updated formula. The impact of that and the settlement, there's 2 key elements that were announced. So one was the confirmation of the ability to increase council tax by up to £5 for a Band D property without triggering a referendum. And the other key thing was the outputs from the formula, which show that for our authority, our government funding allocation is due to go down by about £2.9 million by the 3rd year of the settlement. So you put those 2 things together and you get the measure that is called core spending power. So the core spending power is going up in real terms, but that is a combination of assuming that council tax goes up by the maximum amount without a referendum, offset by that reduction over the 3 years of the government funding allocation. And what that means is that over the 3-year period, the council tax element of core spending power is becoming an increasing proportion of the authority's funding, assuming that the £5 council tax increase is agreed for each of the 3 years, which is what's built into the government's funding calculations. So yesterday, the government published the finalised local government settlement. There was an allocation of additional funding for the fire and rescue sector of about £15 million, of which the allocation to Hampshire and Isle of Wight is £72,000, which will be a one-off allocation in 26-27. So that will drop out again from 27-28. So there are a number of other things that impact the financial position as well as the funding side of things. So the report sets out the impact of inflation and also delivery pressures and reinvestment in the service. There's a number of proposals there. So in terms of inflation, the key assumption that we've been making, we've made a number of key assumptions, sorry. So we start with the forecasts from the Bank of England for the Consumer Prices Index, which is a measure of inflation for a representative basket of goods that a household would consume. That gives us a good reference point, but doesn't reflect exactly the things that a fire and rescue service needs to pay for. So we've made some assumptions around pay and non-pay costs and income in the forward budget and the MTFP. So we're assuming there's a 3% increase in pay costs, a 2% increase in most non-pay costs, and a 3% increase in the income that the service generates. Obviously, there are risks to both the upside and the downside to those, because that is only a forecast. And so one of the things that the report also recommends is an additional amount that's held within the general contingency, which will cover general unknowns and pressures that may arise during the year, but also provide some mitigation for potential higher inflation as well. Particularly as we know that the pay awards haven't been agreed yet for next year, so we don't know exactly what those numbers are going to be. In terms of the delivery pressures, so these are detailed in paragraph 50 of the report. A number of delivery pressures have been proposed during the year, and the list that you see here is what's been reviewed by the executive group and put forward as the highest priority requirements for building additional funding into the budget. One of those, about just under £500,000 of the cost, is to do with additional capacity within the Service Delivery Directorate. And this is to support the objective of delivering operational excellence, so to drive improved performance and tackle some of the challenges that are being faced by the service with strengthened leadership and to help ensure resilience and effective service delivery. And then there are a number of other delivery pressures as well, which we can talk about if there are any of those you'd like to delve into a little bit more. So that then brings us on to the efficiency plan. So we have a requirement to be effective, to be efficient, and to deliver value for money to the public. So the efficiency plan covers off the savings that the authority has received regular updates on against the targets that were set last February. We're on track to deliver in excess of the amount originally targeted, which is a positive because it helps to ensure that the forward budget gap is lower than it would have been without those savings, so it reduces the need to find additional things to do. I'll talk about options to cover the budget gap when we come on to that section of the report. That then brings us on to the section on council tax. So the recommendation, as was discussed in December, will be that because of the financial position that the authority finds itself in, the recommendation is to increase council tax by the maximum allowed without triggering a referendum, so that £5 for a Band D property. which works out at about 5.69% for 26-27. The government's core spending power metric assumes that that increase will be applied when they're looking then at the real terms overall funding available to the authority. The report shows that after bringing forward the budget gap of £1.8 million from last year, applying the various changes that I've talked through so far, and that council tax increase, along with the estimated tax base growth of 0.83%, leaves us with a budget gap of around £2.2 million to be addressed. So in December, the report highlighted that there were various different ways that you can close a budget gap. So you can increase funding, you can increase income, you can reduce costs, or as a one-off, you can draw from reserves. So within the report, from paragraph 77 onwards, it talks about the medium-term position and then what some of the options are that would be appropriate to consider for closing the budget gap. So we're looking at the table just under paragraph 79 is the forecast for the 3 years ahead. And there's more detail on this in Appendix B as well. But we're looking at a £2.2 million gap for 26-27, rising to £3 million for 27-28 and 28-29. There are obviously a number of assumptions in those latter 2 years in particular, although the council tax and settlement funding numbers, we've got at least more certainty through what's been announced in the settlement than we would have had in previous single-year settlements. So the report then has a table that shows the various different options that could be considered. So this is on page 54 under paragraph 82. So there's the option to draw from the budget equalisation reserve as a one-off way of closing a budget gap. There are some options to do with capital financing and reserves that I'll talk about a bit more in a moment. There could be planned temporary reductions to budgets. There's obviously the option to look for ways to deliver efficiencies and savings. We can continue to lobby government for additional funding. We could also apply for exceptional financial support or additional council tax flexibility. And there is the option to conduct a local referendum for an above council tax increase as well in future years. And we may also be able to find some income generating opportunities. So the recommended option for 26-27, we've taken account of the authority's financial management principles within the financial management policy, and those are included at paragraph 83 on page 56 as a refresher. And the 4 options that we have recommended as temporary mitigations for 26-27 are to reduce the revenue contribution to the capital payments reserve on a one-off basis by £1.2 million. So the reason that that can be done is that during the current financial year, some additional one-off amounts have been put into that reserve, and where there's an amount of that that's not yet earmarked, it means that we've effectively made this contribution in advance, and so we can take it out on a one-off basis for 26-27. We also know that there's money within the revenue budget to fund the borrowing costs and the minimum revenue provision charges to do with the capital programme. We haven't yet had to incur those full costs because the capital programme is still in the process of being delivered. So there's the opportunity to temporarily reduce that budget as well without impacting financial resilience and creating too much risk with interest rates, etc. We also know that during 26-27, we could temporarily reduce the budget because of the timescales for the implementation of the new control system. And then that leaves us with a small balance that we would need to fund from the budget equalisation reserve. So those are all temporary mitigations, and so what the report then goes on to say is that the next step then is to consider in a planned and coordinated way how the budget gap could be addressed from 27-28 going onwards. And that is then again consistent with the financial management principles that we should look at these things in a planned way to deliver the savings or any savings that we need to make in a way that will help to meet the safety plan objectives in the best way that we can. So there's then an updated medium-term financial plan summary after those mitigations on page 59, and it shows that we'd be looking to close a gap of £2.7 million for next year, for 27-28, and then £2.9 million for 28-29. So discussed with the chief, and after this meeting, one of the next things that we'd be doing straight away is to begin to plan for different ways that we could follow up on the things that have been identified there as options to close the gap. So that covers off the revenue budget and the medium-term financial position. The report also covers the capital programme. So there is, this is summarised on page 59. But we'll talk about that more in the confidential item later on the agenda. But this sets out how the authority is planning to continue to invest in the assets that are needed for the successful delivery of a fire and rescue service, primarily to do with the estate and vehicles. Page 62 then, the reserve strategy is covered, and that's also in Appendix D to the report. This shows there's a table and a graph that show how reserves are forecast to fall quite considerably by the end of next year, and that's primarily due to the planned investment in the estate and vehicles, as well as expenditure on equipment and IT. There are a number of recommendations then from paragraph 110 to paragraph 114 to do with reserves. So we know that the government is going to make some funding available for devolution. We don't know what our share of the grant will be yet, but we think it would be sensible to set aside some money to support transition costs from within the transformation reserve. So that's covered in paragraph 110. There's also a historic creditor balance that needs to be cleared, which will move some money from the pension fund account straight to the capital payments reserve. Has no impact on the revenue position and is a technical requirement to clear a historic balance. There's also a recommendation linked to paragraph 112 to create a new insurance risk reserve. So we have, over the last couple of years, experienced some costs where the insurance arrangements that we have in place don't provide cover for those costs. So this reserve would be to provide some mitigation for those costs if anything arises in future. There's also a recommendation at paragraph 113 to do with the general fund balance. So compared with other fire and rescue authorities using the government's data, our general reserve at 2.5 million is relatively low as a proportion of our annual revenue costs, but we have held other mitigations that have meant that has been an appropriate balance to hold, such as the contingency we have in the reserve, the higher earmarked balances that we hold, and also the planned contributions to reserves that are built into the budget. As the other reserves reduce over time, it would be appropriate to increase the amount held in the general reserve. So this sets out a recommendation to increase it back to 2.5% of the revenue budget for 26-27, and then to target moving towards 5% over the subsequent years of the medium-term financial plan. There's also a recommendation linked to paragraph 114 then, just to move some money between reserves to make sure that there is enough available to cover planned investment in new equipment that's required. Finally, the report then covers the Treasury Management Strategy, the Capital Investment Strategy, my Section 25 report, and also touches on the Financial Management Code and the authority's insurance strategy. I won't go through those in any detail, but obviously happy to take any questions on those or anything else from the report.
Thank you, Rob. That's a huge amount of information, but nicely presented. Chief, do you want to add anything? Lou? Yeah. Lou.
Thank you very much. Hi. Yes, thank you, Rob. I know it's never easy, particularly given the funding challenges that we are all facing. But I do have one question about the budget, which is this item predicated upon approval of recommendation 15? Because I appreciate we cannot discuss that item in this session, but that will heavily impact upon my thoughts of what is presented in this budget.
Yeah, I think that is the case, because obviously if item 15 is not agreed, then that would have some impact on the budget, so it would need to then be revisited.
So should we be considering item 15 before we consider the budget, is my question then. Or is there another way? Thank you.
Roger.
Can I come in and say that, having discussed it with Paul, is that we're going to propose another addition to the recommendations, which will then say that subject to the P being dealt with as per the recommendation. The 15. So that will get round the issue. Then if 15 isn't dealt with as per the recommendation, then we will have to revisit at that point the budget, which we will have approved. So we'll have to go back and reconsider the budget. So what we're going to do, we're going to assume that the item 15 will be approved as the recommendation, because that's how the budget has been structured, and therefore, so as to cover us in the approvals that we make or recommendations that are here, we'll put in an extra 1p, so which will allow that to happen.
Thank you. It does seem a little strange that we are technically approving something that we haven't yet had that debate upon.
Well, that's the way we're going to do it. Okay. Fran.
Thank you very much. Yes, you're talking about this new insurance reserve. Where is that money coming from? Are we taking it from another reserve to create that? That was what you were just talking about. And how long can we keep using reserves before it starts to affect what the public actually see on the ground? Because we're taking little bits from here, there. How long can that go on for?
So in terms of the insurance risk reserve, how that's being funded, so we're recommending moving some money from the capital and investment risk reserve into the insurance risk reserve. So that's moving £200,000 between two different reserves, which is possible because that reserve was initially set up. One of the reasons was to do with inflation on construction, and where we've progressed more with schemes and some of that inflationary pressure isn't there in the same way. We don't need to hold as much in mitigation. There's also, I mentioned the mitigation for 26-27 with the delays with the the timing of the control system implementation. There's some money that we can release from the 25-26 budget that we can put into this reserve as well. And then also we have, within the revenue contingency for this year, for 25-26, allocated some money for uninsured costs, and assuming that isn't spent, that would then also be able to go into the reserve as well. So we'd be using those three ways of creating that new reserve.
Thank you. So Which one of the reserve pots, if we spend them, and maybe you can't answer this question, I just wonder which one might cause the biggest risks in the future to the service, really.
Thank you. Yes, so we hold reserves really for two distinct reasons in general. So there's the reserves that we hold that are kind of the rainy day fund, just in case something goes wrong, so the risk mitigation reserves. And then we hold the reserves that are like a household saving up to buy something that it knows it's going to need to buy in the future. And so we would expect to hold the rainy day reserves and need to make sure those give us enough mitigation for something unexpected happening. But we would plan to spend the reserves that we're saving up because they are for specific things. So Matt, for example, has got a profile of the equipment that needs to be purchased and when the vehicle spend needs to happen to. So we're putting the money into the savings pot each year and then spending it as we need to. So I think what we need to ensure and what the reserve strategy does and what my Section 25 report needs to confirm as well is that there are sufficient reserves, particularly within that sort of that risk mitigation pot.
Roger.
Thank you. I've got a number of questions. The first one is on page 35 under 19A. It's got £169,000 underspend on whole-time firefighters, largely due to the lower cost of firefighters who are in their development. Well, I understand they're on a lower salary than what full-time firefighters are, and they're not in the pension. I was concerned about our firefighters not joining the pension scheme now. And the other point on that same line is vacancies of firefighters. I was rather concerned to see that we have vacancies when what we've done in the last recommendation and last meeting.
Yes, so in terms of the pension scheme, that is optional for firefighters, and there are some firefighters who have decided not to join the scheme, which does then have a financial impact for us. And then in terms of vacancies, I don't know, Rob, if or
Hello members, try and give you a little bit of clarity on that. The vacancies on 19B are showed under the retained firefighters. So members will be aware that we do find it challenging to recruit the number of retained firefighters that we would potentially need at certain fire stations. But at the beginning of the budget year, we obviously budget for that to be in place. So where you see the £204,000 underspend, that is through vacancies, but also at the bottom of that paragraph, it's to do with the call volumes that they may go to. So we budget for what we believe may be a busy summer or busy winter or busy periods. If that doesn't actually happen, then there would be a reduction in the spend in the retained budget.
I think that's a different paragraph, Rob, because it's 19A is heading whole-time firefighters.
Yeah.
And says £169 underspend, largely due to the cost of firefighters. It doesn't say that's retained. If it had said retained, I would have understood. And I'd have understood that the calls change year on year, so I can understand that, and I understand the vacancies we have. But this was talking about, according to what I read here, is clarification. So what you're saying, this doesn't apply to whole time.
Forgive me, I looked at paragraph 19B, forgive me, which was going into the retained and the vacancies part.
But 19A.
Forgive me, I looked at the wrong paragraph as I was saying, so please forgive me on that. So yes, you will have the development phase of firefighters, which is a lower pay grade for a period of time, and with over 1,000, and we've got about 500 or so whole-time firefighters. As they move round, there will be temporary vacancies that would happen. So someone could potentially put in their retirement for a 4-week notice period, and it would take us, there's always a lag to be able to get people from Civvy Street, if you like, into training and then into permanent place. So there will always be a lag. That is quite a small percentage that happens because of Molly's work, trying to do our best at forward planning, but there will always be a small gap in there. They're not long-term vacancies, if I give you that reassurance.
And firefighters are under development. Can they join the pension scheme?
Yes,
or
they can.
Are they encouraged to?
So firefighters, as soon as they join the fire rescue service, they're encouraged, given all the information that they require, to opt in, opt out of that pension. Traditionally, firefighters would always join that pension, and that's what would happen. What we're seeing is a trend of younger people coming into the organisation. With the pension changes that happen, some people are opting out. I'm not sure what the numbers are of opting out. I don't think it's a huge number, but we are seeing that very different to what we would see that profile looking 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Right, thank you. Next question I've got is under H, is the third party £80,000 overspend on the pensions. Now, as I understood it, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the blue light pensions, police and fire, we share the costs with the police for the administration of the pension scheme at Winchester. So it's based at Winchester, and we share the cost between police and fire, according to the number in each service. Now, again, as I understood it, because the pension is not ours, or the police's, it's the government pension scheme, the government paid us the funding of that. So I didn't understand why we've got an £80,000 overspend. Is it again another one of these where the government is not really paying the full cost? They say they will, but they don't.
So that one relates to the charge that we pay to the Hampshire Pension Services team, and we didn't have the number to include in the budget last year. So the budget should have been increased last year by that £40,000, but it wasn't, and so that's why there's a pressure that's been identified for this year. So it's to do with the cost of the service that we pay for administering the pension scheme.
From the LGA?
Paid to the pension services team.
Pension service?
Sorry, to the pension services team in Winchester. So where the administration of the pension fund is carried out by Hampshire Pension Services.
But I was under the impression that the pension costs were covered by government.
So the government pays for the cost of the pensions for the firefighters. I would have to go back and get you some more information on this particular charge, if that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Lovely. And the next one, last but one, is that on the chart on page 53, council tax. Now, as you said, is the council tax is going to be, if the authority agrees it, will be increased by £5 per year for Band D through each year of that 3-year settlement from the government. So when we take the figure shown on the chart there for 26-27, why is 27-28 lower than this year, when you're going to have an increase next year of £5? And then if you look at the chart of the number of properties, is that I accept A and B as lower than the D, but EF upwards are higher, and proportionately I would think that it probably, the upper ones and the lower ones more or less even themselves out. So if you take on £5, there should be the number of properties times £5 increase in 27-28, and then again on 28-29. I don't understand why they're dropped.
It's a very good question. So the increases assumed are the £5 each year. What we also have to layer on top of that is a change in the council tax base as well. And so for the current year, we've got a 0.83% increase, but we've assumed lower council tax base increases in the future years. So what that just means is the increase won't be as significant because we wouldn't have as many people paying. There wouldn't be as much growth in the number of people paying council tax.
But you're still starting from that same base, so next year you put £5 on. So why, even with no increase in council in properties, why doesn't it stay at the same figure or go up?
I'd have to get the financial model spreadsheet out to have a bit more of a look at that one specifically for you.
Thank you. Yeah. My final question is that on 55, lobbying of government for additional funding, the one I'm very much in favour of. To me, is that we write to the government. I know Portsmouth City has written to the government. I know MPs have written to the government, and we all get the same letter back. And so government really is not taking the notice of it as they should do. And then if you look back, the budget which was set, not to do with us in other ways, the farmers complained about it. They demonstrated outside of Parliament, and what happened? Government took notice because the press took notice. What we're not getting is the press coverage of where we are short of money. And it's that area where we've really got to hype it up. And I strongly believe that the only way of doing it is the unions, all of the unions connected with fire, the NFCCC, the LGA, and us work together as one unit, not individually writing to government, and really demonstrate outside of Parliament or have some high-profile event which then makes the press take notice of it, because I'm sure the press will be on our side for getting more money for the service, and I'm certainly sure the public will be on our side. And that is the way, until we hype it to that sort of a event, we're not going to get anywhere by just writing to them. Unfortunately, I guess no notice is taken. Sorry, that's my...
Roger, I look at you in a different light. Chief Rabble-Rouser. Can I ask the Chief if you would like to respond to that?
Thank you, yeah, and I'm sure most stakeholders would agree that we would love to have some more funding for fire and rescue because it is becoming increasingly challenging. Most of us certainly would agree with that. And just to give you some assurances, I think, from our perspective as a fire and rescue service, we are very keen that fair funding is delivered for fire and rescue moving forward. We know that it's a challenging situation out there economically. We know that all public services are struggling financially. And I'm sure it's very challenging for government to discern which of the good cases is the best good case to fund. But certainly from our perspective, a £2.9 million reduction in the fair funding allocation is challenging for us as a fire and rescue service. And we have written back to government to say that. In our correspondence, the other aspect that I think is really important, specifically here to Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, is the cost of providing an emergency response to the communities of the Isle of Wight as well. There is an island premium associated with the cost of our ability to deliver over there, and it's really important that when the funding formula is revised, it's revised to account for that additional expense that channel of water provides us. It is hugely important. We also strongly feel that the fire funding formula needs to be replaced. And we also know that it's going to be difficult for government to change a funding formula partway through. And we have asked government that the settlement could be changed so that no fire and rescue service actually sees a reduction in their funding until a new funding formula is introduced. It's within government's gift. Unfortunately, that certainly wasn't the case this time around. But also there are some other measures in there that I don't think are really reflective of the situation that we have to navigate when we're setting a budget. So, for example, government's GDP deflector measure of inflation doesn't really reflect the kind of inflation that we experience on things like pay and non-pay costs that we have to manage. So we would like, for example, a fire-specific index to be used instead, which allows us to budget more accurately moving forwards. And we'd also like to see the council tax referendum threshold removed as well. It would enable us to draw on more funding locally, but ultimately the funding that we need as a fire and rescue service needs to come from from a source, from an appropriate and sustainable source.
Mr. Chairman, sorry to come back, but the Chief has just made the point for me of why we have to work together to try and persuade government.
Done. Okay, thank you. Stephen.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just visualising in response to Roger's last comments the idea of having a fire engine push down Whitehall, telling the press the reason for pushing it is we can't afford the fuel, and perhaps turning on the pumps outside Downing Street and spraying, as it were, Downing Street. But we'll move on.
Enough trouble already.
We'll move on from that. The real question was in terms of what we can do from our own resources to try and help ourselves over the course of the next year or seven. I'm sure we have, I know that Jack's got a list of the replacement cycles and so on of things like fire engines. Are we replacing fire engines before they actually need replacing because they've done their 7 or whatever it is years that we reckon their life is? Or are we actually considering the condition of those fire engines as to whether or not they can do another year or two service is the first question, really. It's all about whether we're kind of gold-plating the system. I replaced my last car because the informatics was failing. I didn't replace it because it was 6 years old, which it was. So I'm wondering whether we can do better to extend the life of the assets we've got, and then the time between now and when we actually have to spend the dosh. So I'd be interested in officers' comments on that.
Chief.
I'll invite Matt to talk about the assets in a moment, but just to reassure you, we will continue to work with stakeholders to raise awareness of the impact of fire funding. I'm afraid I have to draw the line on sending fire engines to Downing Street. We certainly won't be advocating that. I'm afraid not. But we will absolutely continue to work with other stakeholders and interested parties to make sure that the case is made as strongly and with as much evidence behind it as we possibly can. But I'll invite Matt to talk about the assets.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. I think to give you some assurance, we absolutely stretch out the replacement of assets as far as we can, but it's also worth remembering that the fire engine isn't just the vehicle, it's also the equipment it houses, and it's fundamentally important that our crews have the right equipment to do their jobs well and be safe in doing that. And as technology of equipment moves, yes, we can modify older vehicles to an extent, but at some point you need to replace the vehicle's carrying capacity as much as it's sort of the actual mechanics of the engine. However, we replace our pumping appliances roughly on a 15-year turnaround, which is when they become very expensive and difficult to start to maintain those kind of heavy vehicles. But in that interim, we cycle our vehicles, so we monitor mileage, and low mileage vehicles are swapped to heavier used stations. So we do routinely keep that kind of asset sweating maintained. The same is true for cars and vans. They're all replaced on a as long as we feel it's sensible to replace it. There's also a sweet spot where we own our assets with the residual values that have to be mirrored. So if you keep the asset too long, it becomes fundamentally worthless, like your own cars. Actually, there's a sweet spot to replacing it where you can get a better kind of capital receipt and then purchase a better vehicle that allows another 15 years. So it's all kind of a juggling game in the market, but our teams work very hard to maximise that.
Happy, Stephen?
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Okay. David Drew?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. Just thinking about the previous question on assets, I'm confident that we have a sensible way of dealing with that, looking at it in a pragmatic sense. I'm aware that Britain delayed the replacement of our nuclear deterrent, and that's costing huge amounts of money because it's getting old and running out it's getting old. However, the Americans were able to refurbish the B-52s that have been going an awful long time and are using Rolls-Royce engines in them. So that's quite good. It does depend, and I think we have a non-political with a big P decision that we're making on our assets, which is hugely important. Chairman, I'm content with this budget. Roger picked up a good few points that I think need further answers, which I'm sure we'll get in due course. But we also heard about ways which we could meet the budget gap. And a letter arrived yesterday, a thick one in an A5 envelope, for my household contents insurance, £800 a year. Band F house, and I've just checked here that I also have to pay £134 a year for my Band F house for the fire service, which I've used, each of those I've used once in the last 20 odd years. And I think we could, in the future, have a useful discussion about whether we go out to referendum. However, now is not the time, because you need at least a year's run-in to convince the public and persuade them about what we are doing to raise our own profile, which we do a great job of already. But if we were going to go down that route, we would need 9 or 12 months to do it, to have a comprehensive engagement plan. And then I think it may well be possible that the public would support us. And we've also heard about, writing to the government. Well, frankly, the government money is our money. It's our residents' money. And I would much rather persuade our residents what a damn good job this service does through persuasion and properly evidenced, to raise more money for this service. And I can call on some experience I've had with the air ambulance that receives no public money, or very, very tiny amounts in its history. £10 million service, that's about a tenth of the fire service. People, it's a very easy ask. Raising money, as we know, is always difficult, but it's a relatively straightforward ask, because I bet no one in this room thinks it's a bad idea that there is an air ambulance. I don't think anyone in this room thinks it's a bad idea that we have a fire service. So presenting our case over a period of time that would require a comprehensive engagement plan to persuade the public to accept a slightly higher precept is probably a good way of doing it, but not now, because we need the run-in, and all of the changes that are going on make it not the thing to start at this very moment. But also, Chairman, I think it's also important to understand that we are under the cosh. We don't have quite enough money to meet all of the service requirements that we would like to, and therefore we're having to play it carefully. And it's in my experience that organisations that are squeezed in financial terms actually look at ways of delivering an efficient service, and that's crucial. That is crucially important. But of course, efficiency isn't the only thing. Effectiveness is what comes, and one hopes that effectiveness follows. But I also accept that we've got to the point where I think if the general public understood the challenges we faced, they would be far more empathetic to saying, actually, we might like to pay a little bit more than the £5 extra that we do. So that's I think enough from me, Chairman. Happy to support the budget, obviously subject to the confidential item that's coming up shortly. But I do hope we can look at ways of constructively engaging and potentially raising more revenue so we can continue to provide the excellent and crucially important service that we do. Thank you.
Thank you. You must let me know who does your house insurance. It sounds quite good. Zoe.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Roger. I had some questions over the staffing as well, so thank you, Rob, for answering them. And I think it also aligns with the some of the points in the inspectorate report regarding demand, allocation and utilisation of staff, so they sort of correlate. So I think there's still a bit of work to do on that. I think, you know, we all know here today that we've had got presented a balanced budget pre-discussion of the confidential item, but as we heard, that is balanced by the increase or going to a maximum of council tax of £5, but also short-term temporary mitigations. I think that's what we need to be careful of. So although we're looking at 26, 27, actually we need to start having those discussions, and I think David said the same about what that looks like in 27, 28. I just want to sort of go back through, in my mind, some of the discussions that we've had. And obviously we know about the fair funding formula, which the title does not actually say what it is because it's not fair. And I don't think the formula is correct. And I think, you know, the public do need to know that it isn't fair that our fire service have a reduction of 2.9 million over the next 3 years. The County Council has also had reductions. So we definitely need to be fighting that corner of what that formula looks like. And Serena, I think when you said there that actually why that formula is being reviewed, there should be no further cuts. I'm not quite sure what they're basing that fair funding formula. It comes as a bit of a surprise. And I think it's that uncertainty. If we knew exactly what they were basing it on or how those calculations were manipulated, it would certainly be easier for us. We know the government announced that they've offered some flexibilities to 7 councils and actually a 5% flexibility to 1 fire authority yesterday, and the additional of the 15 million, which I'm glad you answered because that was my question. But it doesn't help us. The uncertainty of the fair funding review, still we have questions about how that works and what that looks for us when we have that reduction. I don't know if we know this answer, but obviously we weren't aware of that one-off payment, and this again impacts that uncertainty and instability. Actually, if it was all loaded in the fair funding formula, it would be a lot easier for us to do long-term forecasting, whether or not it's just a 2-year, 3-year or 5-year forecasting. So obviously 15 million of for standalone fire authorities. You did say 72,000, didn't you? That seems very little. I'm just wondering what they've based that one-off payment on, considering they've allocated 15 million to standalone fire authorities. I'm assuming it's possibly aligned to the fair funding review, which is why we possibly had so little of 72,000. Great, we've got 72,000, but actually it's not very useful suddenly hearing about that yesterday. And I think that goes back to my plea is government is understanding that we need certainty and fair funding, that it's not just in the title, that it is fair, and takes into account things like geographical locations, rural, whether or not it's the Isle of Wight where we work. And also considering that one-off payments are useful, but not useful in long-term forecasting. So we need that. And I think our lobbying around fair funding needs to look at that, but we also need to understand and lobby towards powers through our mayoral combined county authority. And although I understand David's point of what we need to look at regarding as exceptional financial circumstances or a referendum, I would say we need to understand what our powers are under the MCCA first, and I would say we need to start looking at that because as Paul suggested, that could be this time next year, the 1st of May or 1st of April, I think it is, 2027 currently. I say currently, we know things change very quickly. But coming back to my question, Rob, do we know how they allocated the 72,000 out of the 15 million one-off payment?
So it's to do with the funding floor. So I think it's linked into the authorities that were most affected by the settlement. So I think that we're one of 12 who've received some share of the funding. I think ours is the lowest share, but there are some authorities, therefore, who haven't received any funding from that additional amount.
Ludicrous, those that are most impacted by the reduction of fair funding, so we're going to give you a random one-off payment. Useful, because we've got some more money, but not very useful in financial planning.
Okay, thank you, Zoe. Any more? David? No.
Thank you. I find myself somewhat reluctantly supporting a budget proposal which doesn't go anywhere near where it should. It seems as though we're in a very fragile financial situation, and I think we all want to live in a society where a fire service is not in a fragile situation. It should be in a very robust situation, especially in the context of some of the challenges that we see before us. I mean, hasn't it rained every day since we had that wonderful pass-out parade, where it was pouring then, I think. A reminder, if nothing else, that firefighters don't have a choice about when they have to go out. They have to go out in all weathers, in all circumstances. And it strikes me that if we're really going to support those fire officers at the front line, we need to have the means in order to do it. I think I set a rabbit running last time with this suggestion that we have a referendum. I do agree that this isn't the time to ask for it, but I do think that we need a little bit of time to reflect on every possibility for raising the necessary funding. It does seem like a wall of silence in terms of our representations to government. And I think, Roger, you're completely correct. You know, there's only so many times you can bang your head against a wall before you conclude that you're wasting your time on that one. It would be nice to think that we had the same lobbying powers as farmers do. But yes, we're not going to surround the Houses of Parliament with fire tenders anytime soon. That's just not going to happen, I'm afraid. So, yeah, if Councillor Drew's point was let's support this budget, then yes, I would second that if it was a motion. And of course, it will be subject to our discussions on this later item.
Thank you. Shall I speak to Jeremy Clarkson? Okay, all right. We've been going... Karen.
Well, I agree with David, but I'm going back to the report about talking about we have to have appliances on the Isle of Wight because of obviously it's better to have them there than get them across, and the 20% extra for delivering services. I don't hold much hope either because we've been having that conversation and I brought it up when I spoke to you last, and we still have less funding this year than we've had before. So nobody's listening, but I do hope that I know you're speaking to the unitary authorities anyway, aren't you? So hopefully with the Isle of Wight Council, both together on that subject might help, but I doubt it. Thank you.
Lou?
Well, I am still very concerned about some of the risks that we will carry if we approve this budget. I know it's not easy, but I think I'm with you, Roger. I will march on the Houses of Parliament. I have been known to do this before and to chain myself to things. So I would be happy to do that. You know, the 76,000 probably doesn't even cover the gap we have from the national insurance contributions, which they completely underfunded by more than 50%. And we keep having to suck it up. And I just think it's completely inappropriate. It puts everybody at risk. That includes our own staff. So I'm I am not happy. I 100% understand we need to have a balanced budget. I 100% understand this is not easy to do given those financial challenges. So this is not a reflection on our staff who have clearly worked incredibly hard to do so. But I do feel that that comes with significant risk, which we are storing up for the future, which may be far more in excess of the gap that would be caused if we were to take forward some of our later projects. So that's what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about the health and I'm concerned about the well-being of all the officers and the fact that we're doing this so that we get a balanced budget, but actually I think we are storing up problems for the future, which are risks, which could cost far more than us tackling it now. And I hate doing that kicking things down the road. So I don't feel like I can support it, but I also don't feel I can vote against it because we haven't yet had that conversation about item 50. So I'm really sorry, and I'm not usually annoyed about things, but I am disappointed.
Yeah, I agree
and
with
I
your
do worry about risk.
I agree with your sentiments entirely, Lou. We are playing with the cards we're dealt. You know, and I'm all for marching on things, but that's not a practical solution.
Well, yeah.
You go,
I'm with you. I'll go there with you, Roger.
Roger?
Can I just quickly come back? Is that I think what we all know, the fire service is not just a fire service, it's fire and rescue. So it can get called upon any time. And then also is that the government, because we have a team that can go abroad any time, they call upon us. I know they pay us when they call upon us to do it, just for the time that our firefighters are out wherever they've had to go. And I know one has been away recently because the government called upon them. Now, so anything that happens in this country, we can be called upon to deal with because we're a rescue service. And that has to be paid for. And I mean, I do disagree slightly with council tax, because council tax increase is on the property that people live in, not on the person and has got the ability, well, not necessarily the ability, but income tax, where the money from government comes from, mainly, is based on the person's ability to pay. And that's where it should be coming from, rather than the local one, was where you live. And again, we know a number of people don't pay it because it's on the house, two people in the house, but there's 5 people in there, all working. So 3 of them are not paying it. And that was, I know, Maggie Thatcher's idea, but she went about it the wrong way. There is another way of dealing with it, but I won't go into that. But that's why council tax isn't the best place to get it from. Get it from government, where we all pay and contribute to. We all hate paying our taxes, but we've got to pay for it, and people want it. But I still think, not to say margin, but I still think something up there. Sorry.
I think we better stick to what we have within the realms that we can control. Otherwise, you're about to call a general election, aren't you? We've been going for some time, people. Why don't we have a break before we go through the recommendations, which are lengthy? So, 10-minute break? a mad boomerang. We are going to add some clarity to the situation. We're going to now deal with the excluded items.
Thank you.
Pleasure. And then once we've done the excluded items, we will revert back to the issues that are still to be sorted out. So we are moving to item 13. page 31, members, and the recommendations are as follows. Now, the items listed below are noted by the full authority. That the 25-26 monitoring position and forecast outline for the year makes sense.
It should be noted.
I'm on. Never knowing the understand. Right, so the that the items listed below are noted by the full authority. A, the 25-26 monitoring position and forecast outturn for the year. Does that make sense?
Yes. Noted.
Yes. Noted.
Noted.
That the items below are approved by the full authority. A, the revenue budget 26-27 as set out in Appendix A1. Approved?
Agreed.
That if there are any changes in the funding allocation when the final settlement is published, the change will be managed by amending the draw from the budget equalisation reserve.
Agreed.
C, the revised revenue budget for 25-26 as set out in Appendix A2.
Agreed.
D, that if there is an underspend at year end on the revenue budget of 25-26, as is currently projected, any underspend will be returned to the budget equalisation reserve, except for any underspend relating to uninsured costs, which will be transferred to the insurance risk reserve.
Agreed.
E, that any delays in delivery of approved savings are cash flowed by a draw from the budget equalisation reserve.
Agreed.
F, the medium-term financial plan, additional information as set out in Appendix B. G, the capital programme of funding as set out in Appendix C1 and exempt Appendix C2.
Agreed.
No? You don't agree? Okay. H, the reserve strategy as set out in Appendix D and the specific proposals requiring approval, coverage in paragraphs 109 to 114. I, the Treasury Management Strategy Statement of 26-27 and the remainder of 25-26 as set out in Appendix E.
Agreed.
J, the delegation of authority to the Chief Financial Officer to manage the Fire and Rescue Authority's investments and borrowing according to the Treasury Management Strategy Statement as appropriate.
Agreed.
K, the capital and investment strategy for 26-27 and the remainder of 25-26 as set out in Appendix F, including the required prudential indicators.
Agreed.
L, the Section 25 report as set out in Appendix G, which should be taken into account by the authority in agreeing the budget and council tax.
Agreed.
M, the council tax requirement for the authority for the year beginning April the 1st, 26 of 68,219,266.49.
Agreed.
That the authority's council tax be increased by £5 or 5.69% for a Band D property for the year beginning 1st of April 26, and that the authority's council tax for the year beginning 26-27 for properties in each tax band will therefore be Band A £61.89, Band B £72.21, C £82.52, D £92.84, E £113.47, F £134.10, G £154.73, H £185.68. Agreed? That the precepts totalling £68,219,266.49 are issued on the billing authorities in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight as set out below, requiring payment in such instalments and on such dates set by them and previously notified to the authority in proportion to the tax base of each billing authority in the area as determined by them. Billing authority, Basingstoke, £6,538,953.30, East Hants, £4,967,154.46, Eastleigh, £4,655,144.21. Fareham, are £4,016,777.37. Haven't £4,023,704.17. New Forest £6,898,550.47. Rushmore £3,130,704.06. Test Valley £4,929,989.68. Winchester £5,200,636.85. Portsmouth £5,495,090.46. Southampton £6,293,623.60. Isle of Wight £5,390,958.85, making a total of £68,219,266.49. Agreed?
Agreed.
Accurate to the penny,
Chairman.
Well done.
Good, members, thank you. We now move to the annual pay policy statement and principal officers pay review, which is on page 145 of your paperwork. And I will invite Molly Rhodes to launch into this.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. So this report is an annual report which meets the requirements of the Localism Act 2011, where we're required to prepare and publish a pay policy statement every 12 months. So many of you will have seen this report, a similar report in previous years. There are specific policies and remuneration principles that we must include in the statement, and they're listed at paragraph 9 of the report and are all included within the actual pay policy statement, which is at Appendix A. A key aspect of the statement is to show the relationship between the remuneration of the Chief Financial Officer and the rest of the workforce. And our multiples for this year are currently 5.1 for Green Book staff and 5 for Grey Book staff when you take an average of their salaries against the Chief Officers. And those pay multiples have been broadly consistent for a number of years, which can be seen in the table at section 14 of the report. And when we compare ourselves against other fire and rescue services, we are also broadly similar. And that's because most of the pay awards are nationally agreed and determined, and so have been consistent for some time. The pay policy statement also outlines the various pay frameworks that cover our workforce, and there are 3 key ones that cover our workforce. So Grey Book for our operational colleagues and control staff, Green Book for our support staff, and Gold Book for the principal officers. A key aspect of the Gold Book pay framework for principal officers is the consideration of a local pay award, which must be undertaken by the Principal Officer Pay Group, which is chaired by Councillor Price. This year, a business case for a local pay award was not submitted, and therefore it was not necessary to undertake a full pay review, but the pay group took the opportunity to review the Principal Officer pay methodology, and that can be found at Appendix B to the report, and wanted to make a number of recommendations to improve that process. So in particular, they've made recommendations to move the timeline in line with changes to the timeline for the National Pay Award, and they've also wanted to strengthen the alignment between the services agreed PDR process and the performance information that the Pay Officer Working Group consider on an annual basis. And those recommendations are detailed at paragraphs 6 and 7 of the report. The Localism Act also stipulates that the pay policy statement, which is at Appendix A, has to be considered by a full meeting and cannot be delegated to a subcommittee, and its publication ensures that key stakeholders such as our communities, employees and trade unions are able to scrutinise the pay of our most senior officers and the pay frameworks for our employees. Failure to publish a pay policy statement could raise concerns from those key stakeholders regarding our approach to openness and transparency. And if the statement is approved today, which is recommended at paragraph 5, then this risk will be mitigated by publishing the statement on our website as soon as possible. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Molly. Members? Any questions?
Looks good to me.
approve the pay policy statement as Appendix A for publication on the Wight Fire and Rescue Authority Services website. I'd like to change 6, please, or add to 6, to read that Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority approve that the authority chairman, me at the moment, vice chairman, Roger at the moment, and Zoe should participate in the Chief Fire Officer PDR meeting. Are we happy with that?
Yeah. Why is the change?
Well, I just think we'll have it writing, and see who the people are. Because just leaving it just as vice chair is rather ineffective.
Sorry, point of order, aren't we, if that's an amendment, that you have to propose it as an...
I seconded it, yeah.
I'll propose
Oh, I
it.
didn't see your hand.
Sorry.
I didn't hear you.
Yeah.
No, because then technically we should be able to debate it if you tabled an amendment, which is the way we should do these things rather.
Well, I proposed it, he seconded it, let's debate it.
So do we think this is a thing?
I'm waiting.
Because they changed it, but they just...
Yeah,
by just throwing the word
is
out
it
there.
worth, instead of putting a name, is it worth saying that if appropriate, an independent person from the principal pay officer group? Because it's for the future as well as now, isn't it?
So just name a person, that person
It's named there at the moment because we're going to do this in March.
Okay.
So
happy either way.
after that,
So that needs to come back after May then, right? Yeah, as long as that happens, like the other one, yeah. Make sure that's on the work plan, yeah.
No, I was going to make the same point about naming people. I think you've got 2 different ones there, haven't you? You've got the positions, but you're also naming Zoe.
Yep, thank you. So this is an annual report which comes this time of year, ready for April and the start of the new financial year for the safety plan. So it just provides the updated safety plan at Appendix A, and it outlines the changes that have been made. So the key changes on paragraph 11 onwards. So we've updated the plan to reflect, the new chief fire officer and some other kind of figure changes within the report. And then paragraph 12 is the introduction of 3 new areas of focus which are mentioned in the plan around operational excellence, culture and connectivity, and organisational accountability. And then sat underneath this plan, there are directorate level delivery plans which will go into more detail around how each of the directorates deliver against those 3 areas of focus. And those are areas for us to focus on in order to deliver our objectives to the communities that we serve. So the plan is at Appendix A, ready for your comments.
Sorry. Thank you. Sorry. So you said that the paragraphs 11 and 12 have been updated. Is that because in the report, paragraph 11 talks about trade union representative bodies, and paragraph 12 is the authority statement of intent. But then when we go to the plan, we haven't got any numbered paragraphs. So which paragraphs are you referring to? We've just got 1 page.
On item 10.
Oh,
I think you might be on item 11.
Oh, have I skipped over one? Oh, no, this will make much more sense. I was thinking, I'm completely confused now.
No, so on page 158.
Oh, the operational excellence and the cultural. Yeah, no, this is fine. Thank you very much. I did think to myself, I've lost the plot because I can't find it now. Thank you.
Is that working, Mike, now? Right. I'm completely lost. Where's my bit?
Recommendations on page 157.
Can I just very briefly?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, go on, Zoe.
Just to say, obviously, the three areas of focus I think are very streamlined and actually in line with the inspectorate report when we talk about things like lessons learnt data, in particular the culture and connectivity. So really pleased that we've looked at that. And then part of the inspectorate report also suggested that we need to better align our safety plan. So that work's been done.
Okay, thank you. Any more members? Right, the recommendation is on page 157 and says that the updated Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Service safety plan for 25 to 30 be approved by the full fire authority. Approved? Agreed? Okay, thank you. No, we're coming on to sprinklers, don't worry. We haven't forgotten sprinklers yet.
That's 12.
Yes, you can tell because he's getting into a lather. Item 11, health on page 189, health and safety statement of intent. And Matt, this is you again, please.
Yep, so this is another annual report when we review the health and safety statement of intent, and that is at Appendix A for your consideration. It has been reviewed. There are no changes to it other than changing the Chief Fire Officer's name at the bottom of the document, so it's there for your consideration.
Okay. Members? No? All right. The recommendation then is, on page 189, that the health and safety statement of intent 2026 to 2027 be approved by the full authority. Agree? Good, thank you. And now item 12, here's your chance, Roger. Item 12, position statement of sprinklers, page 195, for those still in tune. And that is Rob Cole.
It is, thank you. I'm very nervous to make sure that I keep up to Councillor Price's expectations on this sprinkler paper. Members, we've always had a position statement on sprinklers, a fire authority position statements for a number of years. And if members remember, it was the tragic circumstances around Shirley Towers where we lost two of our firefighters that made the fire authority at that point want to start lobbying as many people as we possibly could to start fitting sprinklers into buildings. It was named as high-rise buildings in that time. Since then, the authority paper has broadened its reach into the majority of buildings, and it became the right time to refresh that fire sprinklers position statement. One, to do with the number of buildings, different types of buildings that are being built now. Second one, because of a number of fires that have happened worldwide, not just in this country. And then, of course, legislation. So when legislation changes, to make sure we are pushing the boundary and lobbying as best we can. So to take you through the paper, it's worth noting that we made a working group of officers and members. From the members who took part was Councillors Price, Madrick, Parker, Carpenter and Harrison. So if you have any questions, don't ask me, ask them. It was a very useful meeting. Very, very useful meetings. We had 3 meetings to be able to discuss exactly where we were, and that's where we got to a position statement. So if I may, I'm just going to draw you through the actual position statement itself on the key areas and then take some questions. So if we look at sprinklers in schools, the wording has been checked with legislation, legal, and our ambition as a fire service and as a fire authority to recommend that new schools must have sprinklers fitted, and that when being refurbished must consider the retrofitting of an appropriate sprinkler system. If we turn to residential care premises, we welcome the introduction of the mandatory installation of sprinkler systems for all newly built residential care homes for March 25, but will use our legislative powers where appropriate to ensure that those undergoing extension or major significant refurbishment consider sprinklers to protect those most vulnerable from fire. That sprinklers in high-rise buildings, that the Fire Authority welcomes the 2019 reduction of height threshold for the installation of sprinklers in new residential buildings to 11 metres. However, despite lowering of the threshold, we recommend that the retrofit of an appropriate sprinkler system in all residential buildings above 11 metres in height. If I just pause for a second there and just look at the impact that the authority have already had in that area, where we have a number of local authority-owned buildings that now have sprinklers retrofitted in. I think it's worth just pausing to recognise that impact of the Fire Authority's position. If we look at commercial buildings, that we will promote the installation of sprinklers in all commercial buildings based on the ability to improve firefighter safety and reduce impacts on the environment and surrounding infrastructure. Currently, it is only new built of 20,000 square metres or more that require sprinklers. Timber frame buildings. Members will know that an awful lot of timber frame buildings are being built at this moment in time, and they are most risk of fire during that building phase where most of the timbers are bare. We would recommend that timber frame buildings are installed with sprinklers, and installation should be completed as soon as practical to protect the building during the high risk construction phase. If I draw your attention to in domestic properties here, this is one that we grappled with for a number of meetings to get the wording right for the authority. So we support sprinklers in homes designed for the most vulnerable. We recommend a review to seek the integration of sprinkler system in all new builds, which is a similar approach to it has been taken by the Welsh Government. We, as Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service teams, we will continue to report sprinkler saves to recognise National Professional Sprinkler Association to highlight the importance of sprinklers within for people, property and environmental protection. Then lastly, hospitals and other high-risk care facilities. We recommend that all new hospital buildings and other high-risk healthcare premises have sprinklers fitted regardless of their height. Members, that's the proposed position statement that's been worked through by members and officers. Chairman.
Thank you, Rob. Members? Lou?
Thank you to the working party. You've obviously worked really, really hard. The only thing I was wondering was why we haven't suggested to hospital buildings that when they're, like we have on other aspects, when they're doing refurbishment, why are we not encouraging them to do retrospective refitting? I mean, and let's look at what's just happened at Southampton. I think, you know, we could have just strengthened that one. I mean, we've done it for many of the other ones, saying, and if you're doing refurbishment work, think about doing it retrospectively. And did you consider community buildings more broadly when you were making your decisions about where to aim your advice? Thank you.
Are you doing this? Or Rob, do you want to say something?
So I think it's really good points because it's always changing and people's reality or what they see at that moment in time is really important. I think what we try to do is capture all in all areas, because if we look at the sprinklers in residential care homes, the problem is around the healthcare network and the different legislative, I did say that right, powers that we could have, but also that are already within building construction. So there's certain things that we can continue to move on. At this time, this is what the group decided was the right place.
Okay. Fran?
If I can just say, we didn't consider community buildings as such. That you just mentioned, we didn't look at that at all. Whether there should be a paragraph there about community buildings, I'm not sure, or whether they're covered under commercial.
So I just looked through my notes, which might help, which was us being able to, where we would be able to influence our powers the best, how we would be able to lobby the best. Yeah. So looking at specific things that we know that are in the NFCC frameworks as such, or where they're looking for, wherever high risks to the public are. When you look at schools, for instance, actually it's one of the safest places to be during the day because they are well drilled to evacuate the building. The reason why sprinklers in schools are so important is the loss of work, the loss of the building, the loss to the public purse or the local authorities from that position. So some of them, like high-rise, are very much based around life risk and our firefighters' risks. When you look at community buildings, absolutely. If we get invited to partake in the planning phases and the building phases of those, we will be making recommendations ultimately to have sprinklers in all buildings because it makes it a lot safer for our firefighters. And going back to some of the original papers that we've had around contaminants and other things, if we haven't got firefighters entering the building when it's that bad, heat and smoke, that's better for our people as well. So ultimately, we as a fire and rescue service will be using our powers, but also our influence to ask for sprinklers everywhere. But I think your paper here is the ability at your other meetings, within your local authority meetings, your other groups, to say there are some key topics that you could push on for us. Does that help? Okay.
Fran.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's great that this document and its recommendations actually exist now, which is really good. And it's a shame that it's not mandatory, but I understand that it's not, it can't be. Of course, Southampton, I don't think had sprinklers. Lou's already mentioned it, which is a really ironic thing that we've just completed this document. Very sad. Will service officers, my question is, will they be proactive, really proactive in promoting that it exists? And to people like developers, planners and public organisations. I know you've said you will be, but developers and planners particularly, so that it doesn't sit on the website unused. Thank you.
Absolutely, and during our fire engineering ability, we'll be using that to influence. Now, what could be seen as a benefit for developers is using sprinklers can free up more space. It can help in them getting more for their money they're putting out by putting sprinklers, because the travel distances and fire exits and all the other fire safety measures can be taken as a whole. So sprinklers can help that.
Karen. Oh, well, you can't speak then. Okay.
I just say
Roger.
Thank you. From my point of view, I think this now is a much better, stronger statement than we had before, and particularly pleased to get the paragraph expanded in the way that it is on housing, because I'm totally for having sprinklers put into houses when they're built, the same as the Welsh government. Our government and previous governments have never wanted to go down that line, but I think we ought to be pushing as far as we can to get that. The only addition, Rob, I think I saw in one of the documents earlier to this one here, against promoting the ability of sprinklers, there was the website put, so that anyone wanting to go onto the website had it there. So I don't know if that could just be added. It's got promoting the ability, but it hasn't got the actual www whatever. Not on my document.
I can reassure you that we'll make sure that the links are either on the website so they can drop down and make them, or it's on the document. I think it should just be a link on the document.
Yeah.
You might not see it as a www doc.
I just don't see it because you dropped that,
yeah. Right, thank you. But other than that, I'd like to thank everybody that's been involved with it, and it's developed to something which is really strong and which we can promote wherever we can. And I think that what we ought to do is send it to the LGA, or what we've done, and also the NFCCC, tell them and get them to get everybody else doing the same.
Any more members? Rob, thank you. Roger is happy. You've done well. Members, thank you. Lastly, I would like, Nicola, is it possible for you to send all members a link to the safety plan? Because I've spoken to some of you, and I personally would love to send that safety plan to my 12 parishes so that they know how good their fire service is. And we don't do enough of that sort of stuff, so if you'd like that, it's coming your way. Okay? Members?
Sorry, before you go off that one, Chairman, in the past you've asked for it to be sent to county members, to all county members as well, so they're aware of it.
Yeah, I'll do that after the next.
Yeah, but what about Southampton, Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight councillors?
Well, this is why they get it,
Yeah.
and they can...
Yeah, because Sally was saying...
I can't nanny everybody.
Because Sally was saying that she gets a copy, but not all the other councillors. So I'll tell her she's got to send it.
Yeah.
Yeah, right?
It's called your intuition. Members, and those watching and officers, thank you very much. This is the last authority meeting. There isn't one in April, so this is the last one of this tenure.
Yeah.
See you later, the Lord willing and the creek don't rise. Thank you.